Pioneering surf parks took 10 years to go from pipe dream to paying customers. 10 years! How can digging a hole, filling it with water, agitating that water, and asking people for money be so incredibly complicated? Today's WavePool projects get done on a much shorter timeline, thanks to lessons learned from those early adopters in the space. In WavePoolMag Sessions, we hear from the brightest minds in the business. Everything's on the table topic-wise, from choosing a tech provider to maximizing food and beverage revenue, and more. So join us for WavePoolMag Sessions.
When we think about building a surf park, we just assume the architect designs the wave pool, the contractors build it, and then the paying public comes flooding in. Done. Dream accomplished. But after you've nailed the technology, settings, pricing, and everything else, what if it takes 5 minutes for your servers to get from kitchen to poolside cabana? It's one small example of operational considerations that must be done before you build your surf park, before the shovels hit the ground, before the concrete is poured. On this subject, today we will be speaking with 3 experts in the field who can tell us all those little things that you need to know before you start to build your surf park. Fascinating conversation, as there's way more involved in this than I imagined. So I'd like to welcome in this episode of WavePoolMag Friday Sessions, Certified Venue Executive Brian Stovall, Architect Bruce Greenfield, and Chris Falce of Kimley Horn. These gentlemen will be discussing all those little things that go into planning before the building commences. I have only rudimentary knowledge in this subject, so most of the conversation will be carried by our guests today. Thank you for joining us.
So we're with Icon Leisure, and we basically have 3 pillars that we do. First is operational design consulting, so work collaboratively with the design group. We can then phase that into the construction phase, to what I refer to as building the park while the park is being constructed, which is the staff, the operating models, the emergency action plan, getting vetted with local authorities, permitting, establishing a relationship with vendors and the community at large, things like that, building a staff, training the staff, and then flip it into a grand opening event that then can manage the facility day to day, ongoing, or any of those pieces a la carte.
Yeah, so my day to day has a lot of different moving parts and going on, and I've been with Kimley Horn now for almost 20 years. I'm a civil engineer by trade. And on our side, we're a full service design consulting firm. We partner a lot with Brian on various projects and Bruce as the architect on different projects. On our side, we're primarily as the engineers, we're designing the infrastructure, the surf lagoons, the shelves, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And then depending on the role that the developer needs, sometimes we're filling in as the landscape architects, the traffic consultants. So there's a lot of different positions on the baseball diamond per se that we can play, and sometimes we play one position, sometimes we can play all 9. It's really what the development calls for.
Yeah, I'm Bruce Greenfield with AO Architects. We're a fairly large firm with 13 studios, and one of the elements that those 13 studios give us is we have an expertise in retail, we have an expertise in residential, we have an expertise in hotels, we have an expertise in surf parks, and depending on what uses are on a project, we bring those experts to bear on the project. And we're typically in early at, hand sketches on tracing paper. With Brian and Chris, we worked together on a project where we flew out to the site, spent 3 days with these guys, and we all brainstormed with the client for 3 days and ended up with a reasonable site plan that all the stakeholders had bought into. And a lot of times we'll have the contractor in there, and we just kind of orchestrate that from the beginning and pull from these guys. We all work together and everybody's got great ideas, and we're kind of the ringleader of that process. Brian's the expert in this, so we really count on him. But let me just throw out a couple of points on that from the architect's perspective. Is we want to pull from Brian all of his operational knowledge and apply those things, and he's instrumental in helping that. But one of the things about looking at it from an operational perspective is there's front of house and there's back of house. Front of house has to be a pleasant, graceful, beautiful journey for the customer. Back of house has to be a very efficient circulation of goods and food and trash, and it has to get to every point in the park, but it has to be very discreet. So that's one of the big battles. And then I'll throw this out, Brian, you probably want to add to this, is there's also a series of pay points on a surf park. So you may have the public come in and have viewing of the whole event for free, as an invitation, get them to see it. You may have restaurants that have patios overlooking the different venues and the surf park, and those are free access to the public. Then you may have a beach that might be a day pass thing where you can come in and spend a day on the beach watching the surf, and that's a pay point. And then you have the surf and the other attractions on the property that are also possibly separate pay points. And organizing that and conceptualizing that, a lot of that comes from Brian. And then architecturally, we have to make that seem natural, intuitive, and graceful, and that's the fun part of the fun of a surf park.
Yeah, so that's absolutely accurate, Bruce, and I appreciate you saying those things. I'll add to it by just emphasizing what you've said, in that from an operator's perspective, we look at it to basically, I joke that I look at things at a 5-foot level and then a 50,000-foot level and bounce between those two perspectives all the time. And so we look at it from the guest journey perspective, the guest experience perspective, but also the staff perspective, the vendor perspective, and also it's maybe a few little nuances of the community perspective, right? And by that, I mean just kind of generically the overall community, but also the specific areas of like first responders. And we want to set those guys up for success. We want to make sure that we ingratiate the park to the local environment, things like that. And also with surf parks in particular, of course, we're trying to maximize the enjoyment for surfers, of course, but we're also trying to proliferate the sport, right? So we want to make it the barrier to entry for non-surfers to come in and learn the sport and to progress as well. One of the key metrics in operating that's pretty well known is length of stay. So we don't want, let me take a positive spin on that. We want the guests to come in and enjoy themselves for a longer period than just maybe the surf session, right? So some of the things that you were alluding to, Bruce, like the overall journey, the feel, the look, the comfortable elements of the park, but also a diversification of the attractions, right? So once you've done your surf session, what else is there to do in the park? And we've programmed some of that stuff in some of the facilities that we've worked on, and then made things, like the emergency response. It's not a question of when you'll need an emergency response, but it's a question, or not a question of if, but a question of when. And so we want to set us up for success in writing emergency action plans. And just as an example, we'll design a facility to where emergency responders can get in easily, but not impact the overall flow of the guest experience, right? So maybe there's a secondary opportunity for a transport or something to come in that doesn't impact the overall guest journey or guest experience, if that makes sense.
Well, I think it's like we said earlier, it's really a collaboration and everybody has good ideas, but Brian and I will talk about these things and we'll do this. Brian will even do sketches though. But we'll take his sketches and make it legible, and then we kind of agree on it, but we work together on those things. And surf parks are a new thing, and one of the interesting aspects is that the public agencies, the building departments, the health departments, the public works, the sewer districts, they have a whole layer of requirements, and they're not sure necessarily what to make of a surf park. So each one with each jurisdiction is a little bit of an exploration of how it has to be set up, and that affects operations as well.
And Bruce, that's where I was going to jump in, and Brian and I are working on quite a few things where, as you touched on, the jurisdictions have not traditionally reviewed these. By nature, they are risk adverse. So what Icon Leisures and Bruce and Kimley Horn bring forward is experience with venues of this kind, so that we're able to show them a good operational and life safety plan and emergency access plan early on, even sometimes at the time that we do a pre-application meeting, to get them comfortable that they are working with the experts that have the experience in this field, where they may not have that experience or expertise. And it gives them a level of comfort knowing that the right people are working on the project, and they're not going out on a limb by approving such a surf lagoon with program elements and stuff where they likely have never reviewed that in their time being in public service working for these jurisdictions.
Yeah, and to accentuate that point, Chris, even in some of the more recent documents that we've worked on in some of these projects that you're alluding to, some of the jurisdictions have asked specifically that there be a demonstrated experienced operator put forth so that they understand the operational elements, the emergency elements, the chemical analysis of the water, all those types of things to increase their comfort level. So that was a good point.
Chris, let me just throw out there also from a civil perspective, one of the unique things about a surf lagoon is it can displace a lot of dirt because it's a big 5-acre body of water that goes into the ground. And it's really critical that civil be involved early to balance that site and, keep you from incurring large costs that then cut into the operational and design elements. Could be a big number, so it has to be managed really carefully right from day one.
Absolutely, Bruce. That, and along with drainage and even water demands, sewer demands, parking analysis, really getting the jurisdictions comfortable with how that is going to function and operate, peak times. A lot of that are the first questions that they're going to ask, and when you show up and you have those answers for them, that is a very critical piece of having a successful surf lagoon and development move forward.
Yeah, and making them comfortable, like you said, that they have an experienced team, we know what we're doing, and they're not going to impose some ridiculous requirements on the project that could be a real problem. That, hey, we've thought this through, here's how we look at it, and then get them comfortable with it.
Yeah, speaking of costs, that may be another point of collaboration that, obviously there's the developmental costs that everyone is concerned about, especially in today's market. So, one of the other elements that, having an operator involved in the early phases is that, when you put together the package of selecting your site, creating the concept, which we've talked about, right? We all work collaboratively to create a great concept, drawings, interactive opportunities, figure out the flow, the guest journey, the staff's journey, the vendor journey, all these things. Once we get that nailed down, then we're going to, you guys do a great job at creating the OPCC, right? The opinion of probable cost for the overall construction of that concept, and pairing that with a feasibility study. An experienced operator can then come in and give a kind of a forecasted business model or pro forma of operating expenses based on the activations that have been identified in the concept. So once you have the site, once you have the concept, once you have the opinion of probable cost, and then you have an understanding of what that can generate from an operational standpoint, revenue and expenses, right? Real revenue expenses from an experienced operator. That puts together a pretty clear package that is able to be put into an IM or gives a pretty good indicator of a go, no go type of a scenario for a lot of the developers. Any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I all of us, as we work on these projects, and Bruce, I know that you've probably touched the most surf lagoons and general artificial swimming lagoons. I've touched a significant amount, and that's a huge part of it, Brian, is the equity and debt markets are not ideal right now.
Right.
It is a very new product, a new concept and program element, and investors and developers want to understand where their risk is, what their return is, and a big part of that picture is really understanding what the operational costs are moving forward. I think that that's helped us tremendously, even in the design of it. I'm sure you can speak to the same, Bruce, when we're laying out these sites to be able to have Brian's input on operations, and sometimes through our lens we're purely considering construction costs, and Brian brings up the point early on in the process before you ever get the facility opened. Well, yeah, guys, like that's going to save you construction dollars now, but my operational costs are going to be 2x. Hey, we should really think about that now and making an adjustment. And it's always cheaper on paper than after the facility's open.
Yeah, and Brian may point out that, hey, this layout requires 15 staff members, and if you do these few things here, we can get it down to 12 staff members, and then that translates into a pro forma. And project costs on every project, because of interest rates, because of inflation, just because of the nature of the business, every project has to be watched extremely closely from a cost perspective. And we work pretty closely with this group and with the larger team to, look for cost-effective ways to create great results at every phase, at every step of a project. So it's key.
So maybe an example of that that I've encountered a few times, and these things may seem trivial, and Bruce pointed out it may cut the staff from 15 to 12, but over the life of a project that has an impact, right? Especially with the human resources related comment, because as we all know, human resources is the most expensive part of an operation, and turnover is actually very expensive. It's a lot more expensive to recruit, hire, and train a staff member than it is to retain. So one of the other examples is, on a couple of different projects, we've seen that this concept is coming out beautifully, but we forget about storage, or we forget about where is the staff going. One of the projects I worked on recently forgot about the staff until the end. We brought it up, and then it was basically the staff was located on the farthest side of the park, away from where all the staff are actually working. So the impact on that, while it may save cost on the building structure, is that now you have staff that has to walk 20 to 30 minutes to get to their positions, and back and forth and breaks and all that. And over the life of a project, operationally, that becomes a poor staff experience and a costly one. So, that's just one example of several or many that I could give. But that's kind of making a point there. So.
An interesting aspect of operations that affects design, and I think we've seen this on a couple of projects, is take the pay point. We want to provide a free public access for the community to be able to participate and see and view the project. And yet we want to have people pay to get onto the beach or to do the surfing, obviously. And one of the things that we've done is with grade differentials, this involves civil, is, raising up the public side so the public arrives a little bit higher than the beach, and it's like a boardwalk with a rail along it. And it's a natural thing. It's a beautiful thing. It feels really nice to be walking on the boardwalk overlooking the beach, but it also separates that pay point from paid and non-paid in a really beautiful and graceful way. And that's how we kind of work together to take those operational aspects and work them into something that becomes a really nice feature of the project. So, and that takes all three of us to make that work.
Yeah, a nice feature and user experience. I mean, that's the key at the end, is the users you need to make sure are coming back again and again, and they want to come and see it and be like, all right, next time
I'm going to try.
I'm going to get in the water, right? I don't have my bathing suit with me right now. I had no intent on surfing, but I'm coming back and I'm doing
Absolutely.
it on the next trip or the next visit.
And the diversification of attractions, right, on the property. So fitting into that, 2 points on what your comment, Bruce, is I think the perception of surf parks is one, and this is just a theory. It's not rooted in anything other than experience. But if a non-surfer hears about a surf park, I don't know that they would be willing to go to that. You're like, well, why would I want to go to a surf park? I don't surf. Just like, why would I want to go to a ski resort if I don't ski, right? Well, similar to ski resorts, you have the beauty of the mountains. We have the beauty of the waves and the breaks that everyone is attracted to. And then to Chris's point, the barrier to entry is reduced because now people will want to come out and look, and they see that there's beginner elements to the surf. There's an opportunity to participate without actually having to surf, and everybody enjoys watching surfing, right? Whether they're really good or really bad. Either way, people are enjoying watching it. But then the diversification of attractions.
People watching at its best,
Yeah,
Brian.
absolutely. And then the diversification of attractions that also grows the skill level, maybe, is to diversify with the different technologies, right? The standing wave versus the dynamic wave. And if we can figure out how to put both of those on a property, then that becomes cost effective for a developer, because oftentimes we find ourselves in markets where maybe a winterized session may not create as much pool from a participation standpoint on a dynamic wave. But if you put the standing wave on it, that's easier to treat the environment and the water to bring it up to a comfort level where people will participate annually. So it continues to generate revenue from an annualized basis. And I think one of the challenges that we've all seen is that people generally think summer when they think the water, right? But these parks need to function all year long, not like a traditional water park, or even in a lot of cases some amusement parks which are seasonal. But they really need to generate revenue annually to make the IRR what it needs to be. And so the more we can reduce the barrier to entry, whether real or perception, and by that I mean, Bruce, to your point, working with the elevations creates less of a fence, right? Because if you have an elevation, you can have a 6-foot fence, but from an elevation, it only looks like it's a 3-foot fence. But then it goes down and you're actually having the barrier. But when you're at that raised elevation, then you can see the surf without having to look through a fence, which is a perception, but a real one. So there's all kinds of nuances like that work through as this team works together, and we brainstorm and we think about really optimizing the annualization of revenue generation rather than making it more of a traditional model. So,
And
I think.
Oh, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, as like a part of all that, going through the design and operations, I think the newness of the space has required us, particularly with the debt and equity markets, to really vision and understand the phasing of these projects.
Yes.
The majority of these projects that have, pay-to-play elements and restaurants and maybe resort hotel components, investors aren't ready to spend all of that money at once. And really going back and forth on the operations of, hey, what can we phase in day one and construct and build and operate day one that is going to make sense, that's going to make money, to allow for the comfort level to bring on the next phases of these projects. I mean, there's very few developers out there that are going to be able to deploy the capital that it takes on a 5-acre surf lagoon that is fully amenitized, 360 degrees around it. So I think a big part of that is, in this space, is really understanding operationally and through the pro forma, hey, what do we need on day one to give a great user experience, to make money, and really plan out over time the next phases. And I think, the three of us, and, those are the elements that you need from the design and operational perspective to help the developer and investors make those choices.
And the other thing that we feel pretty passionate about is, as we were saying, the surf. It's great people watching. People love watching people surf and all that. They may not be surfers, so we want the hotel rooms to overlook, to be beachfront. Even if you're in Dallas or you're in Houston or you're in Missouri, we want to bring a beach experience there and have the hotel be beachfront. We want to have apartments or condominiums, all with a view of the surf. You know, the surf is such a center of attraction that we try to put all the uses so they kind of get some of that magic spilled on them, and really make it more than what it is of just a surf park with people coming to it. But this is an attraction for a whole development, and like Chris said, they're always going to be phased.
Yep.
You know, especially at first now,
There's a lot of the area around the lagoon is the high value real estate, and that's always part of the push and pull too, is like technically you need some back of house and operational space for
right.
Brian. The developers always want the highest and best use on every square inch of it, but the reality is you have to have some back of house space that really lets it function the way that it needs to.
Yeah, in that regard, the highest and best use may be some of that back of house so that your guest has the best experience possible. Bruce, you mentioned something that made me think about this other element, in that surf by and large is a cultural sport, right? There's a cultural element to it. There's a community element to it. Most of the surfers that I've met and the environment that I've seen around surf is there's elements in any regard of the core group or tribal, I think, but by and large, surf is a community sport, and it's a complementary sport. People enjoy hanging out with each other, and creating that beach type of community environment is probably important as well in the design element, to have space that allows that community to be just that community. So whether you're surfing or not, you want to go just to be around that community. And so some of the areas that we've talked about programming, and to Chris and Bruce, both of your points, I'll just say complementary to, is identifying best in use or highest and best use of the land. Maybe surf elements that have always been associated with surf that community can get around as well, like having concert venue or a space that's open to do practicing or balance boards or any of that. And then you guys have worked with me on a couple of occasions. You probably heard 100 times we talk about multi-use type of opportunities, where we can do something one day, we can do something else the next day, we can do something else the next day, and it's all designed to be conducive to that type of an environment. Well, even to the extent of, in some of the maybe softer attendance months, we do things like a car show, because cars and surf have gone together for a long time. So just doing those types of activations that are conducive to the community element, and it really brings people in and reduces the barrier to entry from the perception of just the surf, the surfer, because there are a lot of aspirational surfers out there that I think this industry will need to embrace to become an industry, right? To become a part. So
I can promise you that I'll never get my wife on a surfboard in the ocean, but I have a chance at a surf lagoon.
There you go.
I think one of the other hurdles that we have faced in looking to execute these across the country is finding the right contractors to build them. Finding the right general contractors that are interested, that want to do it, and the right trades that have the expertise. Some of the success that we've had is really finding a group that is willing to travel, and a group that's willing to vet and really understand the qualifications of the local sub-consultants, on the engineering side, whether it be structural, mechanical, electrical. It's important to have the right trades with the right experience build these. And there's certainly large infrastructure projects. They're not swimming pools. A swimming pool contractor is not going to successfully build you a surf lagoon. So I think that's a challenge that is in the market, and with every surf lagoon, as particularly the ones looking at more remote locations, that really take some planning in advance to make sure
and
that
with that, Chris, I'd like to add
overcome
that this is a burgeoning industry, and it's a new concept that's being pushed out. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say that, none of us are in firms that we are the only one in the world that does it. I'm sure we have some experience. We work collaboratively with each other. We have a great relationship with each other, and we're a good team. But I think that if we can continue to be collaborative with others that are in our space, whomever they may be, and that we can share some best practices, understanding the nuances of competition, and we all have to stay, busy and employed. But at the same time, as we learn additional things and we have we identify those builders, to your point, that are willing to come in and have the experience, expertise, or moxie to be able to tackle these things, that we share those. And through various industry trade associations that we all attend and things like that. But a collaborative effort among all of us that are in the space, I think, would be beneficial to the industry as a whole, and it would raise us up, because when one of us succeed, we all will start to succeed. And I think that there will be enough moving forward that we'll all stay busy. So just wanted to make that,
and we've sure
make that
learned
point.
a lot. We've sure learned a lot in these last few years on these projects.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I think in general, the success of the surf industry is positive all the way around because it is so new. Whether that's getting different projects approved in different states. I know that there's a lot of wave technology companies that are out there that obviously, Brian, as you touched on, everybody wants their business to succeed and they're competing with each other. But at the end of the day, the surf industry as a whole will be more successful, and there will be more opportunities all around the country and the world, the more that actually get done and are successful. And I think that's what you were touching on, Brian, is how important that is for the industry, that every project that gets done, whether any technology company or consultant, whether this group here works on it or not, we should want that project to be successful, because that's important for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and I think we have 2 projects under construction right now. The Atlantic Park in Virginia Beach is they're pouring the walls of the surf lagoon. They started pouring those about a month ago, and Desert Surf, they started grading on that recently. So within a year and a half, we'll have 2 of these surf parks open and operating, and I think that's going to be, 1, really exciting, and 2, a real benefit for the industry, because we'll have some real world examples of how these work in the U.S. And I think it's going to be exciting, because I think they're both going to be well received.
Yeah, it's exciting. So, good design plays a lot into it, and design, I'll elaborate on the word design, because it's not just the drawing on the paper, right? It's everything that we've talked about. It's planning the civil, it's understanding the feasibility, it's understanding your anticipated penetration into the market, it's understanding the civil and traffic impact, all the things that we've discussed. And then, of course, the operational elements of it, planning for those and designing around those operational efficiencies, which is one of the cornerstones of our business. So, if a part doesn't take those things into consideration, I would consider that a bad design overall. If you put yourself into a position where there's no parking available, that's problematic. If you build a restaurant there's nowhere to park to go to the restaurant, then that's problematic, right? If you have out parcels that you have reduced your basis on, but that take up all your parking from your surf park, that's a bad design. So thinking through all the elements inclusively, and like I alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, where you look at it at a 5-foot level and you look at it at a 50,000 foot level, and you keep bouncing between the two and massaging the part, will ultimately result in a good overall design. And I think the good design, the check marks, or the check boxes rather, for the good design, touch on all the things that we've said, right? It's a great guest experience. It reduces the barrier to entry. It's inclusive of the overall community. There's a diversification of attractions. There's ample parking. It's a great staff experience, right? So you want your staff. You have happy staff, you have happy guests. You have happy guests, they come back. You need a repeat visit. So those are elements of a good of
That's
good
a really
design.
nice summary, Ryan. That was good.
Yeah. And I think some of that goes into good design is from the onset of the project or the opportunity. is being able to have the developer and client really understand the timeline that it takes to execute a good design, to get it permitted and get it constructed. It's very hard to have, fast and cheap and quality all at the same time. That's almost impossible to do. And I think being able to really confidently talk through what a real design schedule and what the process looks like to actually get it done and built. I think a lot of projects go underneath the stress of, hey, this is taking longer than I thought. We have these carrying costs. We just need to build this thing and get water in it and get it going. And maybe they're not fully ready to open and operate the way that they should. They haven't had enough time to go through a soft opening, to run certain systems. And it's important for these projects not to fail. So I think it's more of a consulting development matter, but it's important to executing a good design. And that's getting that understanding through to the developer and client that they have the right performa that considers those hurdles.
Yeah, what's that old saying, Chris? You can have it good, fast, or cheap. Pick two.
Exactly. That's what I was going for, Brian. Thank you for picking me up.
Got you, man.
Yeah, and sometimes that kind of metered, organized approach that maybe looks like it takes a little longer may be the shortest path because everything's considered at every step and you're not going backwards late in the process, which is different for everybody.
Yep. So it reminds me of another expression that I'll credit to Dave Ramsey, and that is desperation is a partner of bad decisions, right? So if you can plan accordingly in your time, you don't get desperate, you don't get backed into a corner, you don't start making bad decisions, because that's a spiral effect.
And some of these operational considerations of bringing the public in and getting visibility of the project, they're also important when you're entitling these and asking jurisdictions to approve your project, because they want to see a community benefit to it. So, as we design these, we try to take the local community and the public into account so that even if you're not a paid participant in it, or maybe you don't have the skill to surf, you still get a public benefit to it. You may have an event lawn, or they may have concert series or things like where the public can come in, they can be part of it without having to participate too deeply. And that's real positive for the community and helps get these approved.
And it's always difficult. I would say the most difficult problem that can be faced on some of these surf lagoons is getting them approved and through the jurisdiction, particularly if it's in a location that doesn't have code that addresses how they are going to be treated and what they are. I think we've been able to overcome that in several states now and get to a point where we've been able to get through either modifications to the code or a variance process, and it takes a lot of effort and sweat equity on the front end to meet with the jurisdictions, to get them to understand it, to move forward. But I would say on my side, that's one of the most difficult problems to overcome, particularly when you're going into a jurisdiction or state that doesn't have code where this fits in the box. It's always hard to get public officials to think outside of a box that they've been operating in for 20 or 30 years. I don't know about yourself, Brian or Bruce, is a challenge that another challenge that you've had to overcome, because I know you've both had to overcome those difficult challenges as well. But
yeah, those are difficult, and it's helpful, at least from an Icon perspective, that members of our team have worked in government, have worked in municipalities, they worked in state level, they worked for private, they worked in P3, public-private partnerships and things like that. So it helps to understand the nuances, like sole source, that's something that can help with an RFP type of a situation in a municipality. But yeah, those are very real. My biggest challenge, and I don't know if this is the best example, but my biggest challenge is actually talking to people, and the response is, why do I need an operator right now? I don't have anything to operate. and helping them to understand the impact of an operator's point of view early in the design process, and really getting them to buy into that. We've been very lucky in that those that do understand it have embraced it later. And honestly, when I started the company, I thought guys like yourselves, Chris and Bruce, that I'd get laughed at in the boardroom because you guys obviously are experts in what you do, but it's been met with open arms, and I'm very appreciative of that.
So, the biggest challenge that we have on these things is that they're fairly complicated, and there are a lot of consultants and a lot of parts and a lot of pieces, and getting everything to fit and work together and having everything land where it needs to be. I mean, and Chris, you probably know this, but just the utility infrastructure that runs along the lagoon with your sports lighting and your low voltage and your RFID systems and your video camera and playback systems and the water and sewer and drainage and the storm sewer, all of these things run in a fairly constricted area, and it's really important that it be identified early, organized, and laid, even at a higher level than a typical project, because everything's in close proximity. It all has to be right and make sure it fits, and try to get people to the team to understand the complexity of this. Takes a little bit. They're like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. I'm worried about it. Let's focus on this. You don't see it, and in the end, you don't even know it's there.
It's super important. You just don't see it with the eye.
Even know it's there. It's all behind the scenes, but boy, it's critical. And the contractor, just getting everybody along the line to take it seriously is one of our biggest. They don't realize, they think it's simple, and it's not. So, oof.
For the engineers, it's always like just expected to work. There's no glory to it. Everyone just expects it to work, and if it doesn't, you're gonna hear about it.
A lot of our background is in producing events. So, everything from festivals to regional concerts to, we've worked on national touring events. And if nobody knows that we're there and have done our job, then we've done our job, and that type of thing.
Brian, thank you for setting this up and for the time. And it was a pleasure to be a part of it. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and looking forward to having more discussions around surf lagoons and projects in the future.
Appreciate it, Brian. Thanks so much, and I hope to see you guys out at the show here pretty soon in person.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me. Brian Stovall, thanks for inviting me. This was a real pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.